Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in a story that really stands as, well, the ultimate benchmark for audacious criminal planning in 20th century Britain.
We're talking about the 2.6 million mystery.
Exactly. This is the anatomy of the Great Train Robbery.
Yeah, exactly. And our mission here, for you, is really to shortcut all that vast amount of research out there on this subject.
Get past the headlines, the romanticized films.
Right. We want to move past those and trace the actual plan, which was incredibly meticulous, and then, well, the catastrophic failure of the cleanup phase.
Such a contrast there.
It really is. And then the immediate legal consequences, the cultural fallout, too, which, really defined organized crime for decades.
And we've got some fantastic sources. They cover everything, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. From the precise electrical tampering of that railway signal right through to the decades-long hunt for the missing millions, it's all there.
Okay, before we dive into the nitty-gritty, we just have to establish the scale here, because we hear 2.6 million pounds today.
Sounds like a lot, but maybe not world-shattering now.
Right, but you have to put it in historical context. In 1963, that total haul, 120 mail bags stuffed with cash.
It was equivalent to roughly 52 to 60 million in today's money.
50 to 60 million. That colossal sum, that helps you understand why the case just captivated everyone.
And why the state reacted with such, well, severity.
It was completely unprecedented, wasn't it?
Truly, nothing like this kind of theft had ever been successfully pulled off in British history. And what's fascinating, looking back at the historical backdrop, is the timing.
The early 1960s.
Yeah, the early 60s were this period of really rapid social change. Britain was kind of shedding the strictness of post-war austerity.
A new generation emerging.
Exactly, one that was, actively questioning traditional authority, deference. All of that was starting to crumble a bit.
So this wasn't just some technical heist. It tapped into something bigger in the culture.
Precisely. The sheer boldness of it, the audacity, it sort of captured that emerging spirit. It was a huge, dramatic statement that maybe the old rules didn't apply anymore.
For the criminals, it's about the money, obviously.
Primarily wealth, yes. But for the public, it became this focal point for debates about order, authority, crime, and punishment.
Okay, let's unpack that ambition. Let's start with the driving force, the people involved, and those incredibly detailed plans, right? Motivation. We have to start there. The sources are clear. The financial gain was huge. That 50 million equivalent, that's life-changing security, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Instant multi-generational security for, let's be honest, mostly working-class guys. But it was more complex than just greed.
What else was driving them? What elevated this beyond just another big score?
Well, for the leader, Bruce Reynolds, and his core team, this was as much about legacy as it was about the cash.
Real legacy.
Yeah, they were already known figures in the London underworld, established criminals.
Yeah.
But they saw this as the ultimate capstone to their careers.
So criminal ambition, showmanship.
Pretty much. Cementing their status as, well, legends is the term often used, isn't it? Part of that 1960s criminal folklore. They wanted to pull off the perfect, untouchable crime. Something people would talk about forever.
And that desire for perfection, that drove months and months of incredibly detailed planning.
It did. Reynolds put together a team of 15 people, each one chosen for a specific skill.
Thieves, drivers, lookouts.
And crucially, specialists. People with technical knowledge, railway knowledge.
The structure of the team itself tells you something, doesn't it?
It really does. This wasn't just a random group deciding to do a smash and grab. It was almost like a professional operation, maybe even military style. Everyone had a specific role they'd practiced.
And the intelligence gathering. That seems key.
Absolutely, the backbone of the whole interception plan. Without that inside knowledge, it probably wouldn't have even been attempted.
Can we break down that intelligence? It wasn't just knowing the train carried money, was it? They needed specifics, operational details.
That's right. They relied heavily on an informant. The Ulsterman is how he's often referred to, though his identity remains debated. This person had inside knowledge of the Royal Mail's high-value package coach operations.
So things like the schedule.
Exactly. The specific schedule of the London-Glasgow mail train. Which carriage actually held the huge cash loads, mostly old banknotes heading for destruction, interestingly.
And the timing. The bank holiday weekend.
Crucial. They knew the Scottish bank holidays meant an unusually large amount of cash, unrecoverable old notes, was scheduled for that specific run on the night of August 7th into the 8th.
Anything else? Staff numbers.
Vital. They knew how few staff would be aboard that specific coach. Minimal crew. That was key to their plan of minimizing violence, or so they hoped.
That insider knowledge made the whole thing viable, but actually stopping a massive train safely, quickly, in the dead of night, without using the emergency cord, which would alert everyone, that's a huge technical challenge.
And this is where the planning gets, well, fascinating.
Oh.
Almost absurdly clever in its complexity. They brought in someone who really understood railway signals. The electrics.
They didn't just want it to stop.
No, they needed the driver to stop voluntarily, following standard railway procedure. That was the genius of it.
So how did they force a red signal without being near the controls?
They basically had to trick the system. Standard railway protocol, even then, dictated that if the green proceed light goes out, the driver must stop.
So cover the green light.
As simple as that, apparently. They used something like a glove or just a piece of material to cover the green lens at the trackside signal, Sears crossing signal.
But wouldn't that just look like a fault?
It could, yeah. So to make it convincing, they didn't block the green. They actively rigged the red stop signal light.
How?
With an external power source, a simple 6-volt battery connected carefully to ensure the red light illuminated fully, brightly, convincingly.
So the driver, Jack Mills, sees a perfectly normal working red signal.
Exactly. At Sears Crossing, he does what he's trained to do, follows protocol, hits the brakes.
It's kind of stunning, isn't it? The sources really highlight this detail. The criminals were totally relying on the driver being a professional, following safety rules.
The whole heist hinged on him not assuming it's just a fault and proceeding cautiously. They needed him to stop. Dead stop.
It's a beautiful piece of, well, criminal risk management, I suppose.
It really is. And the location they chose, Bradego Railway Bridge near Ledburn in Buckinghamshire. That wasn't random either.
Why that specific spot? What made it so strategic?
You can look at it from 3 angles, really. Seclusion, access, and context.
Okay, seclusion first.
It was remote enough. A big, noisy operation with 15 guys, several vehicles. It wouldn't be immediately noticed by locals or anyone passing by at 3 a.m.
Makes sense. Access.
Crucial for the getaway. It was strategically close to good road networks, A roads, maybe even the nascent M1 nearby. Uncongested roads, vital for a quick escape and for the dispersal plan later.
And the third? Context.
Procedural context. The bridge itself, Sears Crossing. It was situated in such a way that a signal stop there might not seem immediately bizarre to a driver who'd been on the route for hours. Maybe routine maintenance, who knows?
They'd checked all this out beforehand.
Oh, extensively. Surveyed the area, timed the train speed, checked local police patrol patterns, even measured the distance from the track down the embankment to the nearest road access under the bridge.
It sounds like they nailed every single logistical detail, just perfectly.
It really set the stage for a spectacular success, operationally speaking.
But as we move into the execution phase, that's where the plan starts to fray, isn't it? Specifically with the introduction of violence. That changed everything.
Right. The clock really started ticking around 3 a.m., August 8th, 1963. That timing, as we said, was deliberate.
Minimum visibility and minimal staff.
And maximum cash load. That bank holiday accumulation was key. The sheer scale of the haul was unprecedented, partly because of that coincidence of timing and the mail schedule.
Okay, so the train stops at Bradego Bridge. The execution needed to be fast, right? Big team, big job.
Absolutely swift. The gang swarmed the train immediately. The few crew members aboard were quickly overpowered, subdued.
And then the next critical phase, moving the specific coach.
Yes, forcing the driver, Jack Mills, to decouple the front engines and, crucially, the high-value package coach from the rest of the mail train.
And then make him drive it forward.
Exactly. He was forced to drive just that section forward, maybe half a mile or so, to the precise spot under the bridge where their getaway trucks were hidden, waiting.
That takes specific knowledge, doesn't it? Operating the train, decoupling, things the robbers wouldn't necessarily know.
No, they had to rely on Mills to do it, and the sources suggest they had to physically intimidate him quite heavily to get him to comply.
Which leads us to the sheer physical effort involved. People picture grabbing bags of cash, but this was different.
Totally different. It wasn't walking away with a briefcase. We're talking 120 heavy mail bags.
And they were heavy.
Stuffed with old paper currency. Each bag weighed around 56 pounds, or about 25 kilograms.
So doing the math quickly, that's roughly 3 tons of cash.
Pretty much. 3 tons that had to be physically moved from the train down an embankment in the dark to the trucks.
How did they manage that so quickly?
Our sources detail a highly disciplined, well-rehearsed human chain. They formed a line, coach door, down the slope, to the trucks, passing bags along.
Like a fire brigade bucket line, but with money.
Exactly like that. And they moved the entire 2.6 million pound haul in just 20 to 30 minutes.
Incredible efficiency.
It speaks volumes about the planning, the rehearsal, the coordination. They were clinical, fast, and they absolutely secured the objective. Mission accomplished on that front.
But in that same brief window, that moment of incredible success, a single critical error happened. An act that changed the entire perception of the crime.
The assault on Jack Mills.
Let's focus on that. What do the sources suggest actually happened?
Well, the gang's initial intention, it seems, was a clean operation. They wanted to avoid serious violence, partly because the sentences were much stiffer for crimes involving GBH or worse.
But Mills resisted.
Apparently so. He resisted the demands to move the train, maybe tried to fight back, refused. And in response, someone struck him hard on the head.
With what?
An unknown blunt object, often speculated to be a metal bar, an axle spanner, something like that.
Was this a planned part of the intimidation or just panic, spontaneous?
The consensus, especially looking at later testimony and analysis, leans towards it being a spontaneous act, an escalation of intimidation to force compliance in a really high-stress, time-critical moment.
But regardless of the intent.
Regardless, that single blow transformed the entire case. Before that moment, you could maybe frame it as a clever heist. Audacious property crime, something that maybe in some circles generated a bit of grudging admiration for the sheer cheek of it.
And after the violence,
It immediately became a brutal attack on an innocent working man, plain and simple.
that act of violence, even though not lethal, was the crucial turning point.
Absolutely. It stripped the narrative of any potential romance, made it a serious crime against a person, and that shift profoundly influenced the police response, public opinion, and, critically, the judge's approach at sentencing years later.
Okay, so the money's loaded, Mills is injured, the train is abandoned, the getaway.
Immediately executed. They used multiple vehicles, vans, maybe an old army truck, cars, following different pre-practiced separate rites,
All heading to the hideout.
all converging on Leatherslade Farm, an isolated farmhouse they'd bought specifically for this purpose about 27 miles away from the bridge.
And the plan there was simple.
Classic cool-down strategy. Lie low for a few days, divide the massive haul, which itself was a logistical challenge, destroy every single shred of evidence connecting the farm to the robbery or to them, burn clothes, tools, everything.
And then just disappear.
Disperse slowly, individually over several days.
Ugh.
Avoid drawing any attention. Create distance between the crime and any potential arrests. It was supposed to be the final, careful step.
Which brings us, quite dramatically, to the moment where all that genius planning was completely undone by utter, almost unbelievable carelessness.
This transition is just one of the most compelling parts of the whole story, isn't it? You go from this military-grade precision in the planning and execution
To just baffling sloppiness.
utter juvenile carelessness in the aftermath. Maybe it was the adrenaline wearing off, the exhaustion, maybe just the intoxicating effect of knowing you've got the equivalent of $50 million in cash sitting there.
Whatever it was, it led to huge oversights.
The cleanup at Leatherslade Farm was rushed. It was inadequate. Frankly, it was embarrassing for supposedly professional criminals.
And that carelessness basically handed the police the breakthrough they desperately needed.
Exactly. Scotland Yard launched one of the biggest criminal investigations in British history almost immediately. Hundreds of officers thrown at it.
Huge public and political pressure, right? Solve this quickly.
Immense pressure. A crime of this magnitude, attacking the Royal Mail, injuring a worker. They had to get results fast.
So the police eventually found the hideout a few days later.
Yeah, a local herdsman tipped them off about unusual activity at the supposedly empty farm. When the police arrived,
What did they find? What was the scene like?
it was a disaster area for the gang, but a forensic gold mine for the police. They'd tried to burn things in the fireplace, but it was incomplete. They left behind sleeping bags, leftover food, empty bottles, wrappers.
And crucially,
Critically, they left behind items that investigators dream of finding. Clear, untouched fingerprints. Lots of them.
the sources describe the police calling it a treasure trove of clues.
That's exactly right.
Let's talk specifics here because the items themselves are almost comical in how ordinary they are, especially compared to the scale of the crime.
Well, the two most famous examples of their forensic failure are fingerprints found on a ketchup bottle.
A ketchup bottle.
Yes. And even more famously, on a Monopoly game board and pieces.
They were playing Monopoly while hiding out with 2.6 million pounds.
Apparently so. Passing the time while waiting for the final plan to divide the money and disperse. They spent days handling these common objects.
Believing they were safe. That no one would find the farm.
Perhaps. Or maybe just a lapse in discipline, overconfidence.
In fact,
Believing they'd pulled it off and the hard part was over.
it's the ultimate contrast, isn't it? The genius of rigging a railway signal undone by forgetting to wipe down the sauce bottle on the game board.
It really suggests a profound psychological shift from that hypervigilance during the robbery itself,
To a kind of relaxed, almost celebratory mood once they reached the safe house.
and that resulted in a fatal drop in situational awareness.
Mhm.
They completely underestimated the police, underestimated their tenacity, and underestimated the developing sophistication of forensic science, even in the early 1960s.
So the police find these prints. How quickly could they actually process and match them back then? It wasn't instant digital databases.
No, definitely not. It was a painstaking manual process. But Scotland Yard had highly specialized fingerprint experts. They meticulously photographed every print, lifted them, cataloged them,
And then compared them.
compared them against their existing police records. The huge fingerprint files they kept on known career criminals, particularly those operating in and around London.
And because these were professionals, experienced criminals.
Their prints were almost certainly already on file from previous arrests or convictions. That was the key.
The sophistication of the gang became their undoing forensically.
Absolutely. Within a matter of weeks, remarkably fast for the time, those clear prints from the ketchup bottle, Monopoly set, other surfaces at the farm, they were matched to known associates in the London underworld.
And suddenly, the police had names.
A solid, actionable list of prime suspects. They could directly link specific individuals, known criminals, to that hideout farm, and therefore strongly link them to the robbery itself. The whole house of cards started to collapse.
The arrests followed quickly then.
Very quickly and efficiently. Most of the core gang members were actually in custody within just a few months of the robbery.
How were they caught? Just forensics.
Forensics was the key breakthrough.
Yeah.
But arrests also came from traceable, marked money. Some of the notes included in the haul were recorded, and the gang weren't careful enough dispersing it. And, inevitably,
Informants.
yes, the huge reward money offered by the police and insurers tempted people within the criminal network or on its fringes to talk. Betrayal played a part too.
So that meticulous, sophisticated plan completely rendered meaningless by a few days of unbelievable carelessness at a farmhouse.
It's an incredible turn of events. The planning was genius, the execution largely successful, but the end game, the cleanup, a total failure.
And the speed and determination of the police response were remarkable. That same determination was about to be reflected brutally in the justice system.
Yeah, the legal response to the Great Train Robbery was always going to be massive. It
Yeah.
was designed to be just as monumental, just as impactful as the crime itself.
The scale of the theft, the attack on state infrastructure like the Royal Mail, the public outrage, it demanded a really visible, powerful show of state force, didn't it?
Absolutely. And the trials themselves became huge media events, global spectacles.
They were held in Aylesbury, right? Not a normal courtroom.
That's right. They had to use converted council offices because the local courtrooms just weren't big enough to handle the sheer number of defendants, the legions of lawyers, the mountains of evidence, and of course the intense global press interest.
And they started incredibly quickly.
Astonishingly quickly, just 5 months after the robbery itself, January 1964, the trials began.
And the judge, Edmund Davies, his stance was clear from the outset.
Crystal clear.
Yeah.
His primary aim, stated quite openly, was deterrence. He famously said the sentences needed to reflect the gravity of the crime and act as a stark warning.
A warning to other organized criminals thinking of similar large-scale audacious heists.
Precisely. Stop this kind of thing happening again.
And the sentences he handed down, they were astonishing for the time.
Absolutely shocking to many. The core gang members who were convicted, most of them received 30 years imprisonment each.
30 years. Can we just pause on that? How extraordinary was that number in 1964 Britain?
It was almost unbelievable. You have to understand, back then, a 30-year sentence was virtually unheard of for a property crime, even one that involved a serious assault like the one on Mills.
People convicted of murder sometimes got less.
Often received shorter nominal sentences, or certainly expected to serve far less time before parole. 30 years meant effectively locking them up and throwing away the key for a generation. It was intended as a permanent, visible deterrent.
And the judge justified this based on...
He made it clear it reflected 3 main factors. 1, the enormous financial scale of the theft. 2, the professional planning and audacity of the crime itself. And 3, crucially, the violence inflicted on Jack Mills. That was key.
And this severity immediately sparked a massive public debate, didn't it, about punishment, justice.
Huge debate, enduring debate, really. Our sources show the public was fiercely divided right down the middle.
How did the arguments break down?
Well, it quickly became quite politicized. On one side, you had argument A, often pushed by civil liberties groups, some lawyers, maybe more liberal commentators. They argued 30 years was excessive, disproportionate.
The murderers got less argument?
Exactly. They felt the judge was using the robbers as political examples, making a point about rising crime rates, maybe overreaching his judicial role, sentencing based on public fear rather than strict legal precedent for property crime.
But the other side, argument B, representing the strong law and order view, felt the sentences were spot on.
Absolutely. They, and likely a large segment of the public, outraged by the crime, maintained the harsh punishment was entirely appropriate, necessary even.
What was their reasoning?
They emphasized the premeditated nature, the professional scale, the attack on a key state service, the mail, and the absolute need for the state to protect its infrastructure and its workers.
And the violence against Mills was central to their argument, too.
Repeatedly cited, that assault was the justification for why the sentences had to be purely punitive, overwhelmingly deterrent, rather than focused on rehabilitation or just reflecting the norms for theft.
So this legal discussion became a real touchstone in the UK for years afterwards.
Fundamentally influenced debates about sentencing guidelines, particularly for organized crime, for decades. It set a new benchmark for severity.
It's fascinating, isn't it? The state's massive reaction kind of confirmed the criminals' ambition, they did become legends, of a sort, but it also ensured they paid the absolute maximum price in terms of their freedom.
A heavy price indeed. But the story, the saga, it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot, because two major escapes were about to add whole new layers of drama and folklore to the tale.
Right, so the story shifts quickly from the courtroom drama to the prison yard. And these high-profile escapes, they just kept the Great Train Robbery in the headlines, didn't they? Cemented its place in popular culture.
They absolutely did. Kept the narrative alive. The first really notable escape was Charlie Wilson.
He wasn't inside for long.
Barely. Served only about 4 months of his 30-year sentence before his associates staged a pretty sophisticated breakout from Winson Green Prison in Birmingham.
Showed the underworld still had reach, loyalty.
It certainly demonstrated that. Though Wilson's freedom didn't last forever, he was eventually recaptured in Canada, of all places, 4 years later.
But the escape that really took this story into the realm of international celebrity, maybe even notoriety, that was Ronnie Biggs.
Oh, Ronnie Biggs.
Yeah.
His escape in July 1965 from Wandsworth Prison in London was, well, it was like something straight out of a movie script.
How did he do it?
Scaled the prison wall using a rope ladder. Thrown over the side by accomplices waiting outside in, believe it or not, a furniture removal van.
Incredibly audacious, almost cheekily so.
It was. And it immediately turned Biggs into this high-profile international fugitive. And, for better or worse, into a kind of folk anti-hero for some.
His life on the run became legendary in itself, decades long, across continents.
That's right. We know he had plastic surgery done in Paris to change his appearance, spent time in Australia, before eventually finding his way to Brazil.
And Brazil was key, wasn't it? Why there?
Brazil became the ultimate safe haven for him. Crucially, at that time, there was no extradition treaty between Brazil and the UK for crimes like his.
A legal loophole.
Which Biggs exploited to the absolute maximum. He didn't exactly keep a low profile either. He seemed to embrace his outlaw status.
Giving interviews, posing for photos.
All of that. He even recorded songs, famously one with the punk band the Sex Pistols. He became the public face of the robbery, the cheeky one who got away, living this seemingly glamorous, carefree life on Copacabana Beach.
While his former colleagues were serving out their full 30 years back in Britain.
Exactly. That contrast fueled the myth.
This constant evasion, Biggs' fame, it kept the robbery in the public eye. But the deeper mystery, the one that really endures, is about the money itself.
The actual loot. Yeah.
Of that 2.6 million, 60 million equivalent, the vast, vast majority was never recovered.
And that missing money, that's the absolute key ingredient that transforms this from just a historical crime story into an ongoing, almost mythical legend.
What did investigators actually recover?
Only a tiny fraction of the total haul. Mostly some of the March money that was spent too quickly or carelessly by some gang members shortly after the robbery, or cash found during the initial arrests and searches. But the bulk of it
just vanish.
Simply vanished. Into thin air, it seemed.
So what do the sources, the investigations tell us? What are the most plausible theories about where all that money went?
Well, there's no single consensus, which of course only fuels more speculation and more myths. Investigators chased down countless leads over the years.
Theories like buried treasure.
That was one romantic notion: cash is buried somewhere in the English countryside. But more realistically, theories focused on rapid dispersal through existing organized crime networks, or the possibility of immediate professional international laundering.
Getting it out of the country quickly.
Exactly. One prominent theory suggested the money was just too hot, too much cash to handle safely in the UK, with the police investigation at full tilt. So it was immediately passed on to third-party professional handlers.
People specialized in washing dirty money.
Precisely. Who might have managed to convert it into legitimate assets, property abroad? Maybe anonymous Swiss bank accounts back then, before any paper trail could be properly established or followed.
And the code of silence among the criminals themselves must have been incredibly strong on this point.
Absolutely unbreakable, it seems. Even after decades of imprisonment, intense interrogation, repeated offers of deals or rewards from authorities, journalists constantly probing, the main gang members who were caught never gave up the location of the bulk of the cash.
Why do you think that is? Fear, loyalty, or maybe they didn't even know where it all ended up.
Could be a mix of all three. Fear of retribution from whoever ended up with the money, a sense of underworld loyalty or code. Or perhaps the distribution was so complex, handled by specific individuals like Reynolds, that many of the lower-level members genuinely didn't know the final destination of most of it.
Whatever the reason, the fact that the money remains unaccounted for is fundamental to the enduring fascination, isn't it?
It represents this huge, tangible prize, potential wealth beyond dreams that just disappeared. It keeps the idea of the perfect score, the ultimate getaway, alive in the public imagination, even though the reality for the robbers was very different.
It's the pot of gold at the end of the criminal rainbow that supposedly nobody ever actually found or got to spend.
You know, we've spent a lot of time talking about the planning, the execution, the escapes, the figures, the dramatic stuff.
Stuff movies are made of.
Exactly. But it's really vital, I think, to balance that romanticized narrative, the daring caper idea, with the very real, very serious human cost.
Which often gets overlooked or just edited out of the popular versions of the story.
Completely. And that cost was borne most directly, most tragically, by the train driver, Jack Mills.
His injuries weren't just physical, were they? The blow to the head was serious, but the sources talk about deep psychological scars, too.
That's right. The head injury itself was severe, requiring stitches, causing ongoing issues. But he also suffered significant psychological trauma. PTSD, essentially.
Night terrors.
Anxiety.
Reports mention night terrors, a deep-seated fear of crowds, loud noises, being alone. He did try to go back to work on the railways.
But he couldn't.
He struggled immensely. His confidence was shattered. He eventually had to take a less demanding job. And sadly, he died just 7 years later, in 1970. Relatively young.
And his family always believed the robbery was directly responsible.
They maintained steadfastly, publicly, that the attack shortened his life and destroyed his peace of mind in those final years. They felt he never truly recovered, physically or psychologically.
It's such a sobering reminder, isn't it, that even a supposedly clean property crime, the moment it crosses that line into violence against a person, it inflicts deep, lasting, often permanent damage on innocent people just doing their jobs.
And the human cost obviously extended to the robbers' own families as well. Those 30-year sentences, they're not just abstract numbers.
No, they dismantle entire lives, entire family structures.
Yeah.
Think about it. Children grew up entirely without their fathers present.
And the wives, the partners.
Often face profound social stigma in their communities. Financial ruin sometimes, trying to pay enormous legal fees. Plus the constant stress of managing family life under the shadow of the crime, often under scrutiny from law enforcement and the media. It was devastating.
Even for those who escaped, like Biggs. Life on the run isn't exactly a picnic.
No, it's a life of constant fear, paranoia looking over your shoulder, stress. Often unable to openly contact family back home, unable to hold down legitimate work, always reliant on the criminal underworld or precarious legal loopholes.
Did any of them express regret later on?
Several did, yes. In later interviews or writings, a number of the gang members stated quite clearly that the money, whether they actually got much of it or not, brought them nothing but misery. That it simply wasn't worth the decades of lost freedom, the separation from family, the constant looking over their shoulder.
So this case wasn't just a media sensation. It had real profound impacts on policy, too. Law and order in the UK.
Oh, absolutely. It was a genuine watershed moment for security and policing.
How so? What changed specifically because of the Great Train Robbery?
Well, the sheer success of the robbery itself, getting away with that much cash, forced an immediate and dramatic overhaul of security protocols around cash transportation.
Armored vans. Guards.
We saw the rapid increase in the use of specially designed armored vehicles. The deployment of armed security guards became much more standard practice for high-value movements, and the development of more sophisticated tracking systems, alarms, communication protocols for cash in transit.
So the criminals, ironically, forced a whole new era of logistical security to be invented.
Inadvertently, yes, they exposed massive vulnerabilities. And on the policing side, that huge investigation launched by Scotland Yard.
The one that relied so heavily on forensics from the farm.
Exactly. The scale of that manhunt, the resources poured in, and particularly the rapid and successful use of fingerprint evidence to link suspects to the scene. That was a major turning point for police methods.
How did it influence future investigations?
It really created templates. The way they coordinated across forces, managed huge amounts of information, prioritized forensic evidence, those techniques influenced how major crime investigations were conducted in the UK for decades afterwards. It forced law enforcement to become more technically focused, better organized to combat complex, professional criminal enterprises.
And culturally, well, the story was just guaranteed to last, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Why has this specific crime lodged itself so firmly in popular culture?
It just had all the perfect ingredients for compelling drama, didn't it? Huge stakes, that 50 million equivalent. Meticulous, clever planning. A dramatic, high-risk execution. Then immediate, catastrophic failure in the cleanup. Crushing sentences. And then the added spice of the spectacular escapes.
It's a ready-made movie plot.
Exactly. It inspired countless books, newspaper serials, documentaries, TV shows, and of course, films. Most notably the 1967 film Robbery, and others loosely based on it. It cemented its place in criminal folklore, not just in Britain, but globally.
Which creates that fascinating paradox we talked about earlier.
Yeah, the crime is simultaneously sort of celebrated in some quarters as this masterful, audacious feat of professional planning and nerve.
Yet, at the same time, it has to be condemned for the brutal violence against Mills and ultimately the futility of the whole enterprise for most involved.
Right. Almost everyone was caught relatively quickly. They served incredibly long sentences. The money for most brought misery or was never even seen. And the primary victim suffered terribly.
That paradox, that tension, is probably why it continues to fascinate.
It's a perfect study in criminal ambition pushed to the absolute extreme, only to be completely undone by simple human error, carelessness, and the overwhelming power of the state's reaction when truly provoked. It showed the underworld what might be possible, but it also demonstrated the near certainty of a crushing response.
So, wrapping this up, what's the main takeaway from this deep dive into all the sources surrounding the Great Train Robbery?
I think it really demonstrates the ultimate limits of criminal ambition, perhaps. You have this meticulous, almost perfect planning leading to a spectacular, world headline-grabbing success.
But that success was instantly undermined, wasn't it? By a single moment of catastrophic violence and then an immediate, almost amateurish forensic failure.
Which led directly to discovery, arrest, and decades of imprisonment for nearly everyone involved.
It really serves as an ultimate case study, doesn't it? Not just in how to plan a large-scale theft, but maybe more interestingly, in how public perception works, how it's shaped.
Absolutely. The story the public often remembers, the one that gets romanticized, is maybe Ronnie Biggs on the beach in Brazil, the cheeky escapee.
But the reality for almost everyone else involved
Was brutal hard time, maximum security prisons, deep regret, and the complete ruin of their family lives. A very different picture.
And perhaps that enduring fascination, the reason we're still talking about it so much today, is fundamentally rooted in that missing money.
That vast fortune that vanished.
The fact that the vast majority of that 50, 60 million equivalent was never found. That potential wealth, never realized, never located. It keeps the mystery alive, doesn't it? Keeps the idea of the perfect score, however flawed this one was, alive for subsequent generations.
And maybe this leaves a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. We analyzed how that assault on Jack Mills irrevocably shifted the public and legal perception of the crime, from clever or audacious to brutal.
So the question is,
What if? What if the Great Train Robbers had managed to execute the exact same 2.6 million theft, same planning, same location, same haul, but without laying a hand on Jack Mills or any other railway employee?
Would the public reaction have been different? Would the media coverage have been different?
And critically, would the judge still have handed down those unprecedented 30-year sentences?
Or would it have been viewed, perhaps, fundamentally differently? As purely a massive property crime, albeit an extraordinary one. The entire outcome, the legacy, the severity of the punishment. It arguably hinged entirely on that one moment where meticulous planning was contaminated by violence.
The ultimate professional failure wasn't the planning or the getaway, it was that single lapse in discipline.
A lapse with devastating consequences.
That's our deep dive into the 2.6 million mystery.